Black CEO denied first-class seat. 12 minutes later, he grounds the plane and fires the pilot. The morning sun reflected off the windows of Gate B-12 at Chicago O'Hare International Airport as Malik Thompson adjusted his Italian silk tie one final time. He had taken this flight from Chicago to Dallas hundreds of times before, but today would be different. Today, he wasn't just another passenger heading to a business meeting. Today, he was about to expose something that had been eating away at the heart of American Airlines for years. His Rolex showed 6:47 a.m. when he handed his first-class boarding pass to the gate agent, who barely glanced at it before waving him through. Walking down the jet bridge, Malik felt the weight of what was about to happen. The hidden camera in his glasses was recording everything, and his legal team was watching the live stream from their office downtown. Malik stepped onto Flight 447 and immediately felt the familiar tension that always came when he entered first class. The flight attendant, a middle-aged woman named Patricia Henderson, looked up from her passenger list with a practiced smile that froze the moment she saw him. Her eyes traveled from his face to his designer suit, then back to his face, as if trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense. Behind her, Captain Richard Brennan was doing his pre-flight checks in the cockpit, occasionally glancing back at the boarding passengers. When he spotted Malik heading for seat 1A, he tapped Patricia's shoulder and whispered something that made her nod grimly. Malik pretended not to notice as he placed his briefcase in the overhead compartment and settled into the leather seat he had paid $3,000 for. Patricia approached with a clipboard, her smile now completely gone and replaced with something that looked like determination mixed with suspicion. "Excuse me, sir, but I need to see your boarding pass again," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone of authority that suggested this wasn't really a request. Malik handed it over without a word, watching as she examined it like a detective studying evidence at a crime scene. She held it up to the light, ran her finger over the printed text, and even seemed to be checking if the ink would smear. Other passengers were boarding now, filing past with curious glances at the scene unfolding in first class. A businessman in an expensive suit took his seat in 1B without any inspection of his documents. An elderly white woman settled into 2A, with nothing more than a warm welcome from Patricia. But Malik's boarding pass apparently required forensic analysis. "This seems to be a mistake," Patricia finally announced loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "This seat belongs to Monsieur Thompson, and you're clearly not—" She trailed off, apparently realizing she couldn't finish that sentence without saying something that would sound exactly like what it was. Malik remained calm, his hands folded in his lap, knowing that every second of this interaction was being recorded and analyzed by his team of lawyers watching remotely. "I am Monsieur Thompson," he said simply. "Malik Thompson. And that is indeed my seat." Patricia's face flushed red as she looked at the boarding pass again, then at Malik, then at Captain Brennan, who had emerged from the cockpit. The captain was a tall man with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that came from 30 years of flying commercial aircraft. He took the boarding pass from Patricia and examined it with the same suspicious intensity. "Mr. Thompson," Captain Brennan said, emphasizing the Mr. as if it physically pained him to use the honorific, "I'm going to need to see some additional identification. We've had issues with fraudulent first-class tickets lately, and we need to verify that you are who you claim to be." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was about to spread. Around them, other first-class passengers were settling in without showing anything beyond their boarding passes. A young white man who looked barely out of college sprawled across seat 2B, already ordering champagne from Patricia without anyone questioning his right to be there. But Malik, in his $3,000 suit with his Harvard-class ring and his Patek Philippe watch, was apparently the security threat that needed investigating. He reached into his jacket slowly, making sure the camera captured every moment, and pulled out his driver's license and his American Express black card, the kind that required spending at least $250,000 annually just to qualify for. Captain Brennan, studied the identification with the intensity of someone trying to find a forgery that he was certain must exist. "This says you're from Chicago," he said, as if this was somehow suspicious. "And you're flying to Dallas. What's your business there?" Malik felt his jaw tighten but kept his voice level. "I don't believe other passengers are being interrogated about their travel plans, Captain. But if you must know, I have a board meeting." Patricia scoffed audibly at this, and several passengers turned to watch the drama unfolding. A teenager in row 3 had his phone out, recording everything, though he probably didn't realize he was capturing evidence in what would become a landmark civil rights case. "A board meeting," Patricia repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. "And what company would that be?" She asked it like she was calling his bluff, like she was about to expose him as a fraud in front of everyone. "American Airlines," Malik said quietly, and the silence that followed was deafening. Patricia actually laughed, a short, dismissive sound that would later cost her everything she had worked 23 years to build. "Sir, lying about your employment is a federal offense. Security needs to—" But Malik was already pulling out his phone, scrolling to a contact that simply said, "Board Emergency Line," and hitting call. He put it on speaker, and the voice that answered was one that every American Airlines employee would recognize from company-wide meetings and training videos. "Malik, we're watching the live stream. Is the situation escalating as planned?" The voice belonged to Susan Martinez, the Senior Vice President of Operations, and the blood drained from both Patricia and Captain Brennan's faces simultaneously. The captain grabbed the phone, his hand shaking. "This is Captain Richard Brennan, employee number 447829. Who is this?" The voice on the other end was ice cold when it responded. "Captain Brennan, this is Susan Martinez. You're currently preventing our chairman of the board from taking his seat. Our legal team is documenting every second of this interaction. I suggest you think very carefully about your next actions." The phone slipped from Brennan's nerveless fingers, clattering on the floor of the first-class cabin. Patricia was backing away slowly, her face cycling through expressions of disbelief, horror, and the dawning realization that her entire world was about to collapse. Around them, passengers were recording with their phones, whispering to each other, some already posting to social media with hashtags that would be trending globally within the hour. Malik stood up slowly, straightening his suit jacket with deliberate precision. "Captain Brennan, Ms. Henderson, we need to have a conversation about what just happened here. But first, I'm going to need you to make an announcement to these passengers." His voice carried the kind of authority that came from running a multi-billion-dollar company, from making decisions that affected hundreds of thousands of employees and millions of customers. "Tell them that this flight is being delayed while we address a serious discrimination incident. Tell them that American Airlines does not tolerate bias in any form. And tell them that what they've just witnessed will become a case study in how not to treat customers based on their appearance." Captain Brennan's voice cracked as he picked up the intercom microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain, speaking. We're going to have a slight delay this morning while we address an internal matter. American Airlines apologizes for any inconvenience." But Malik shook his head and took the microphone from him. "Let me help you with that, Captain. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Malik Thompson, Chairman of the Board of Directors of American Airlines. What you've just witnessed is exactly the kind of discrimination that has plagued our industry for decades. This morning, I was denied my first-class seat not because of any security concern, not because of any legitimate reason, but because 2 employees looked at the color of my skin and decided I didn't belong here. This ends today." The cabin erupted in a mixture of gasps, applause, and frantic phone calls to news desks across the country. Emma Rodriguez, the teenager who had been recording from row 3, watched her TikTok followers jump from 300 to 30,000 in a matter of minutes as her video went viral. Her hands shook as she kept filming, knowing she was documenting something historic. "Ms. Henderson," Malik continued, his voice carrying throughout the now silent aircraft, "in your 23 years with this airline, how many black passengers Have you questioned about their right to sit in first class? Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. Captain Brennan, in your 30 years of flying, how many white passengers have you asked for? Additional identification after they've already shown their boarding pass. The captain's face was gray, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He knew the answer, and more importantly, he knew that everyone watching knew the answer too. The other first-class passengers were studying their phones intently, trying to pretend. They hadn't been complicit in their silence, hadn't watched this discrimination unfold without saying a word. The businessman in 1B who had boarded without any scrutiny was now sweating profusely, probably wondering if his own biases were about to be exposed. The elderly woman in 2A had tears in her eyes, though whether from shame or sympathy, Malik couldn't tell. 12 minutes, Malik said, checking his watch. That's how long you spent trying to remove me from a seat I paid for. 12 minutes of questioning my identity, my employment, my right to exist in this space. In those 12 minutes, American Airlines stock has dropped 3%. That's roughly $800 million in market value, gone because 2 employees couldn't see past their prejudices. He pulled out his tablet, showing real-time stock prices and social media metrics. The hashtag #YeTrueAmerican Airlines Discrimination was already trending #1 globally, with millions of views on various videos of the incident. "Sir," Patricia finally found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. "I didn't mean... I've never... This isn't who I am." Malik studied her for a long moment before responding. "Ms. Henderson, this is exactly who you are. The question now is whether you're willing to become someone better." He turned to address the entire cabin again. American Airlines will be implementing immediate changes. Body cameras for all crew interactions in premium cabins. Third-party oversight of any passenger challenges. Mandatory retraining on unconscious bias for every employee, from baggage handlers to board members. And yes, there will be consequences for what happened here today. Captain Brennan stepped forward, his pride finally crumbling under the weight of his shame. "Mr. Thompson, I have grandchildren. Mixed-race grandchildren, if someone treated them the way I just treated you." His voice broke and he couldn't continue. The sincerity of his anguish was obvious, but it was also too little, too late. The damage wasn't just to Malik's dignity or to the airline's reputation. It was to every black passenger who had ever been made to feel unwelcome in spaces they had every right to occupy. It was to every child who would grow up wondering if their success would ever be enough to overcome others' assumptions about their worth. Malik's phone buzzed with another call. This time, it was David Seymour, the CEO of American Airlines. "Malik, put him on speaker." "Malik, the entire board is watching. We're prepared to support whatever actions you deem necessary." The weight of that statement settled over the cabin. Whatever actions necessary. Careers would end today. Policies would change. And maybe, just maybe, the next black executive who bought a first-class ticket wouldn't have to prove they deserved to be there. "David," Malik said, his voice carrying to every corner of the aircraft, "I want Captain Brennan and Ms. Henderson suspended immediately, pending full investigation. I want our legal team to prepare for the lawsuits that are inevitably coming. And I want a press conference scheduled for this afternoon, where we announce the most comprehensive anti-discrimination policy in aviation history." The sound of approaching sirens filtered through the aircraft's walls. Airport security, summoned by someone who had seen the social media posts and realized how bad this was about to get for American Airlines. But also news vans, dozens of them, racing to capture what was already being called the most significant corporate discrimination case of the decade. Through the window, Malik could see them gathering on the tarmac, cameras pointed at the aircraft like weapons waiting to fire. "Mr. Thompson," a voice called from economy class. A young black woman stood up, tears streaming down her face. "This Happened to me last year. Different airline, but same thing. They said I didn't look like I belonged in business class. I didn't have the power to fight back. Thank you for using yours." More voices joined hers. Story after story of discrimination, of being made to feel less than, of having their success questioned and their presence challenged. The cabin became a confessional, with passengers of all races sharing their experiences and their shame at staying silent when they witnessed injustice. Even some of the white passengers began speaking up, admitting they had seen these things happen and done nothing, assumed there must be a good reason, chosen comfort over courage. Patricia Henderson collapsed into an empty seat, the weight of 23 years of unconscious bias crushing her. She thought about every suspicious look she'd given, every extra document she'd demanded, every assumption she'd made. The patterns were undeniable now, laid bare in front of a global audience. Captain Brennan removed his wings, the golden pins that had been his pride for 3 decades, and set them on the nearest seat. "Mr. Thompson, I'll save you the trouble. I'm resigning effective immediately. 30 years of flying, and I never once thought I was part of the problem. I thought I was one of the good ones. But good people don't do what I did today." His confession might have been moving if it hadn't come at such a price, if it hadn't taken public humiliation and career destruction for him to see what he had been doing all along. Malik felt no satisfaction in the man's downfall, only a deep weariness at how many more Captain Brennans were out there, how many more Patricia Hendersons, how many more incidents like this happened every day without a chairman of the board there to stop them. "Ladies and gentlemen," Malik announced, "this flight will not be departing today. Not because I'm grounding it out of spite, but because every person on this aircraft is about to become part of something bigger. You're witnesses to a moment that will change American Airlines forever. Some of you recorded it. Some of you stayed silent. Some of you probably think I'm overreacting. But all of you will remember this day." He paused, letting his words sink in. "When you leave this plane, you'll be asked to give statements. Some of you will be called to testify if this goes to court. You'll have to decide whether you stand with discrimination or against it, whether you excuse what happened here or condemn it, whether you're part of the problem or part of the solution." The FBI agents boarded the aircraft with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this before. They weren't there to arrest anyone, not yet, but to document a federal civil rights violation. The lead agent, a black woman named Special, Agent Denise Clark, made eye contact with Malik and nodded slightly, a gesture of professional respect and personal understanding. She had probably faced her own Captain Brennans and Patricia Hendersons, her own 12 minutes of humiliation that she couldn't fight because she didn't have the power Malik wielded. "Special Agent Clark," Malik said, extending his hand. "I assume you'll need my statement." She shook his hand firmly. "Mr. Thompson, we've been monitoring the situation. The Department of Justice is very interested in this case. Very interested." The implication was clear. This wasn't just about one airline or one incident. This was about patterns of discrimination across the entire industry, and American Airlines was about to become either an example or a cautionary tale. Patricia Henderson was escorted off the plane first, her 23-year career reduced to a walk of shame past hundreds of recording phones. She would later attempt to sue for wrongful termination, claiming she had been set up, that Malik had deliberately provoked the situation. But the videos were clear, her words undeniable, her bias laid bare for the world to see. She would never work in aviation again, would struggle to find any employment once potential employers Googled her name and found thousands of articles about the incident. Captain Brennan followed, his shoulders bowed, looking every one of his 63 years. He would retreat to his home in Florida, where he would spend his remaining years writing letters of apology that Malik would never read and giving talks at schools about the dangers of unconscious bias, trying to atone for 3 decades of discrimination, one presentation at a time. As the passengers filed off the plane, many approached Malik to shake his hand, to apologize for their silence, to promise they would do better. Emma Rodriguez, the teenager whose TikTok had gone viral, asked for a selfie that would later become one of the defining images of the incident. In it, Malik looked tired but determined, the weight of systemic change visible in the lines around his eyes. Emma would go on to become an activist, using her platform to document discrimination wherever she found it, inspired by the day she watched one man stand up to an entire system. "Mr. Thompson," she said before leaving, "my generation won't let this happen anymore. We see everything, we record everything, and we don't stay quiet." Malik smiled at her, the first genuine smile since this ordeal began. "That's what I'm counting on, Emma. That's exactly what I'm counting on." The press conference that afternoon was held in American Airlines' largest auditorium, with every major news outlet in attendance. Malik stood at the podium, flanked by the entire board of directors and senior leadership team, a visual statement of unanimous support that had been carefully orchestrated to send a message. Behind them, a screen showed the video of the incident, playing on loop, a constant reminder of why they were there. "Good afternoon," Maliki began, his voice steady despite the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm him. "This morning, I experienced something that millions of Americans face every day. I was judged not by my character, not by my accomplishments, not by my ability to pay for a service, but by the color of my skin. The difference is, I had the power to do something about it." He paused, looking directly into the main camera, knowing that millions were watching live. Effective immediately, American Airlines is implementing the most comprehensive anti-discrimination policy in aviation history. Every employee, from our newest hire to our most senior captain, will undergo mandatory bias training. Not the token 2-hour session that everyone sleeps through, but intensive, ongoing education that addresses the deep-rooted prejudices that lead to incidents like today's. We're installing cameras in all premium cabins, not to spy on our passengers, but to protect them and hold our crew accountable. We're establishing a third-party review board that will investigate every complaint of discrimination, with the power to terminate employees and recommend criminal charges where appropriate. The room erupted with questions from reporters, but Malik held up his hand for silence. "I'm not finished. We're also establishing a $100 million fund to compensate passengers who have faced discrimination on our flights. We're partnering with the NAACP, the ACLU, and other civil rights organizations to ensure our policies aren't just words on paper, but real, enforceable changes. And we're sharing everything we learn with our competitors, because this isn't about American Airlines winning. This is about making sure no passenger ever faces 12 minutes of humiliation because someone decided they don't belong." A reporter from CNN stood up. "Mr. Thompson, critics are already saying you deliberately orchestrated this incident to create a viral moment. How do you respond to accusations that this was all staged?" Malik had expected this question, had prepared for it with his legal team. "Let me be clear," he said, his voice taking on an edge of controlled anger. "I didn't create the bias that Patricia Henderson and Captain Brennan displayed. I didn't tell them to question my identity, to doubt my employment, to treat me differently than they treated white passengers. All I did was exist in a space while black, and that was enough to trigger their discrimination. If that's orchestration, then every black person who has ever been shopping while black, driving while black, or flying while black is guilty of the same orchestration." Another reporter, this one from Fox News, raised his hand. "Mr. Thompson, don't you think destroying two people's careers over what could be seen as a misunderstanding is excessive?" Malik's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "A misunderstanding is when you accidentally call someone by the wrong name. A misunderstanding is when you mishear someone's seat number. What happened today was not a misunderstanding. It was discrimination, pure and simple. And as for destroying careers, Patricia Henderson and Captain Brennan destroyed their own careers the moment they decided that my skin color was probable cause for suspicion. I simply held up a mirror to their actions. The questions continued. For another hour, covering everything from the financial impact on American Airlines to the broader implications for the aviation industry. Stock prices, which had plummeted during the incident, began to recover as investors realized that American Airlines was taking decisive action rather than offering empty apologies. Several major corporations announced they would be moving their corporate travel contracts to American Airlines specifically because of the new anti-discrimination policies. It seemed that doing the right thing, even when it was painful and expensive, could also be good business. But for Malik, sitting in his office that evening as the sun set over Dallas, the victory felt hollow. He had won this battle, had used his power and position to create real change, but he knew that tomorrow there would be another Patricia Henderson, another Captain Brennan, another black passenger being told they didn't belong. The system was bigger than one airline, bigger than one industry. It was woven into the fabric of American society, and pulling on one thread, no matter how forcefully, wouldn't unravel the whole cloth. His phone buzzed with a text from his daughter, a sophomore at Howard University. "Dad, I saw the video. I'm proud of you, but I'm also angry that you had to go through that we still have to go through that." He texted back, "Change is slow, baby girl, but today we made it move a little faster." 3 months later, the impact of Flight 447 was still reverberating through the aviation industry. Every major airline had implemented some version of American Airlines' anti-discrimination policy, not out of moral conviction but out of fear of being the next viral incident. Patricia Henderson had become a cautionary tale, her name synonymous with unconscious bias in corporate training sessions. She had attempted to rehabilitate her image with a tearful interview on national television, but the public wasn't ready to forgive. The 12 minutes she had spent trying to remove Malik from his seat had become 12 years of unemployability, a life sentence for a crime she still didn't fully understand she had committed. Captain Brennan had taken a different path. He had reached out to Malik directly, not asking for forgiveness but offering to help. He now traveled to airlines around the world, sharing his story, showing other pilots and crew members how easy it was to fall into patterns of discrimination without realizing it. His presentations always began with the same line, "My name is Richard Brennan, and I was a racist. I didn't wear a hood, I didn't use slurs, but I treated people differently based on the color of their skin, and that makes me a racist." It was a powerful admission, one that made audiences uncomfortable but also forced them to examine their own behaviors. Emma Rodriguez had parlayed her viral video into a career as a social justice journalist, using her platform to expose discrimination wherever she found it. She had over 1 million followers now, young people who called themselves Emma's Army, and who were ready to record and share any injustice they witnessed. She often said that Malik Thompson had shown her what courage looked like, but Malik knew the truth. Emma had always been brave. She just needed to see that bravery could make a difference. Her latest investigation had exposed discriminatory practices at major hotel chains, resulting in another round of policy changes and corporate soul-searching. The lawsuits had come, as expected. Not against American Airlines, but by them, against passengers who had made false claims trying to cash in on the $100 million fund. The review board, staffed by former judges and civil rights attorneys, had been meticulous in investigating every claim, weeding out opportunists while ensuring legitimate victims were compensated. So far, they had paid out over $30 million to passengers who had faced discrimination, some incidents going back decades. Each payment came with a personal apology from Malik, a recognition that money couldn't undo humiliation, but could at least acknowledge that wrong had been done. But the real change was harder to measure. It was in the flight attendant who caught herself making assumptions and stopped. It was in the gate agent who treated every passenger with equal respect regardless of appearance. It was in the passengers who spoke up when they witnessed discrimination instead of staying silent. It was in the corporate boards that realized diversity wasn't just about optics, but about having people in power who could recognize and address systemic problems. It was in the young black professional who boarded a first-class cabin without wondering if someone would challenge their right to be there, though that day still felt very far away. Malik had returned to flying commercial regularly, refusing the private jets that his position afforded him. Every flight was a test of the new policies, a chance to see if the changes were real or just window dressing. Most of the time he was treated like any other passenger, which was all he had ever wanted. But occasionally he would see recognition flash in a crew member's eyes, followed by a moment of panic as they realized who he was and what he represented. In those moments he would smile reassuringly, a silent message that he wasn't there to trap them, just to travel. But they both knew he was also watching, always watching, ready to act if the old patterns re-emerged. The academic world had seized on Flight 447 as a case study in organizational change and crisis management. Harvard Business School, Malik's alma mater, had developed an entire course around the incident, examining how one moment could catalyze systemic reform. Students analyzed the financial impact, the legal ramifications, the social media strategy, and the long-term cultural changes. They debated whether Malik had been right to use his position the way he had, whether the punishment of Henderson and Brennan fit their crime, whether real change was possible, or if this was just another corporate gesture that would fade with time. The debates were fierce, with students divided along lines that often, though not always, reflected their own racial backgrounds. 1 year after Flight 447, Malik stood in the same auditorium where he had announced the anti-discrimination policy, preparing to deliver a progress report. The audience was smaller this time, mostly industry insiders and civil rights advocates rather than the media circus of that first press conference. But in many ways, this was the more important speech. This was where he would have to admit that, despite all the policies and training and oversight, discrimination still happened. The numbers were better. Incidents down by 70%, but 70% of unacceptable was still unacceptable. "We've made progress," he began, his voice carrying the weight of a year of fighting this battle. "But progress isn't victory. Every day, somewhere in our system, someone faces discrimination. Maybe it's subtler now, maybe it's less overt, but it's still there." He clicked to a slide showing complaint statistics, compensation payments, and employee terminations. The numbers told a story of improvement, but not elimination. "We've terminated 43 employees for discrimination in the past year. Some of you might think that's too many, that we're being too harsh. Others might think it's too few, that we're not doing enough. The truth is, every one of those terminations represents a failure. A failure to hire the right people, a failure to train them properly, a failure to create a culture where discrimination is unthinkable rather than just punishable." The room was silent, everyone understanding that this wasn't a victory lap, but a promise to keep fighting. "But I want to talk about something else today," Malik continued, his tone shifting. "I want to talk about the passengers who have stepped up, the white allies who have spoken out when they've witnessed discrimination, the crew members who have reported their colleagues' biases, the executives at other companies who have implemented similar policies without waiting for their own viral incident. Change doesn't come from the top down or the bottom up. It comes from every direction at once, from people at every level deciding that enough is enough." He clicked to a new slide, showing testimonials from passengers and employees about positive experiences, about feeling welcomed and valued. "A young black girl wrote to me last month," Malik said, his voice catching slightly. "She said she flew first class for the first time, a gift from her parents for graduating high school. She said she was nervous, had heard stories, was prepared to defend her right to be there. But nothing happened. She was treated like any other passenger, offered the same drinks, the same smiles, the same respect. She said it was the most normal flight she'd ever taken, and that normalcy made her cry. That's what we're fighting for, Not special treatment, not extra consideration, just the radical idea that every passenger deserves to be treated with dignity. As the presentation concluded and the audience filtered out, Malik was approached by a young black man in an American Airlines uniform. "Mr. Thompson," he said nervously, "I'm James Crawford. I just started as a flight attendant last month. I wanted to thank you. My trainer showed us the video from Flight 447 on our first day. She said it was the most important lesson we'd learn, that assumptions can destroy lives, careers, companies. But more than that, she said it showed that things can change, that people like me can make a difference." Malik shook his hand warmly, seeing in this young man the future of the industry, a generation that would hopefully never have to experience their own 12 minutes of humiliation. Later that evening, Malik sat in his hotel room, scrolling through social media posts about the anniversary of Flight 447. The hashtag #12 minutes had become a rallying cry, shorthand for discrimination and the fight against it. People shared their own 12 minutes, moments when they had been made to feel less than, when they had been questioned and doubted and dismissed. But they also shared their victories, times when someone had stood up for them, when a company had taken action, when justice, however small, had been served. It was a testament to the power of one moment to catalyze a movement, one person's stand to inspire thousands. His phone rang, showing a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, tired from the day's events, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Thompson?" The voice was familiar, but he couldn't place it immediately. "This is Patricia Henderson." Malik's breath caught. They hadn't spoken since that day, all communication having gone through lawyers. "Ms. Henderson," he said carefully, "I'm not sure this conversation is appropriate given the legal situation." She laughed bitterly. "The legal situation is over, Mr. Thompson. I dropped my wrongful termination suit. I wanted to call to say I finally get it. It took me a year of therapy, of really examining my life, but I finally understand what I did to you, and to hundreds of others over the years." The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult of Malik's life. Patricia didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't try to excuse her behavior, didn't minimize what she had done. She simply wanted him to know that she understood now, that the 12 minutes that had destroyed her career had also, in a strange way, saved her soul. She was working at a community center now, teaching English to immigrants, trying to give back in whatever small way she could. She had become an advocate for the very people she had once discriminated against, though she understood that this didn't erase her past. When they hung up, Malik sat in the darkness for a long time, thinking about redemption and whether people could really change. The second anniversary of Flight 447 was marked differently. Instead of press conferences and corporate announcements, American Airlines held a day of service. Employees volunteered at community centers, schools, and civil rights organizations. They didn't talk about discrimination policies or training programs. They just showed up and helped. A quiet acknowledgement that fighting bias meant more than just corporate initiatives. It meant being part of the community, understanding the people they served, breaking down the barriers that made us and them seem like different categories. Malik spent the day at a high school in South Dallas, talking to students about leadership and standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything. One student, a young Latina girl, raised her hand during the Q&A. "Mr. Thompson, what if you don't have power? What if you're just a regular person and you see something wrong, but you can't do anything about it?" Malik thought about his answer carefully. "Everyone has some power," he said finally. "Maybe you can't fire someone or change a policy, but you can record, you can speak up, you can refuse to be silent." Patricia Henderson and Captain Brennan thought they had all the power that day, but Emma Rodriguez, a teenager with a phone, had more. She had the power of truth, and she used it. Never underestimate what one person with courage can do. As the event ended and Malik was preparing to leave, the principal pulled him aside. "Mr. Thompson, I want you to know something. 3 of our graduates have gone on to become flight attendants with American Airlines this year. They all said they were inspired by what you did, by the changes you made. They wanted to be part of making things better." It was a small thing. 3 young people choosing a career, but it represented something larger, a generation that saw the aviation industry not as it had been, but as it could be, that wanted to be part of the solution rather than perpetuating the problem. The flight back to Chicago that evening was on American Airlines Flight 447, the same route where it had all begun. It wasn't intentional, just a coincidence of scheduling, but Malik couldn't help but feel the weight of symbolism as he boarded. The crew was different, of course. Patricia Henderson long gone, and Captain Brennan, retired in disgrace. But the seat was the same. 1A, first class, the seat he had paid for and been denied, the seat that had become a symbol of so much more than just airplane real estate. As he settled in, the lead flight attendant, a young black woman named Keisha, approached with a smile. "Mr. Thompson, welcome aboard. Can I get you anything before we take off?" There was no special recognition, no fanfare, no acknowledgement of who he was beyond his name on the manifest. It was exactly what he had wanted, all along, to be treated like any other passenger, to exist in spaces without having to justify his presence. As the plane lifted off, Malik thought about the journey that had brought him here. Not just the physical flight, but the longer journey of fighting for change in an industry and a country that often seemed resistant to it. He thought about Patricia Henderson, trying to rebuild her life and make amends for actions she hadn't even recognized as wrong until it was too late. He thought about Captain Brennan, traveling the world telling his story of unconscious bias and the price of prejudice. He thought about Emma Rodriguez, now a powerful voice for justice with millions of followers. He thought about all the passengers who would board planes today and be treated with dignity because of what had happened 2 years ago. But mostly, he thought about the 12 minutes that had changed everything. 12 minutes that had seemed like an eternity while he lived them but had passed in an instant when viewed from the perspective of history. 12 minutes that had exposed decades of systemic discrimination. 12 minutes that had forced an entire industry to confront its biases. 12 minutes that had ended careers and launched movements. As the flight continued toward Chicago, Malik pulled out his laptop and began writing. Not a corporate memo or a legal document, but a letter to his grandson who hadn't been born yet, who might not be born for years, but who would someday inherit the world Malik was trying to change. "Dear grandson," he wrote, "by the time you read this, I hope the story of Flight 447 will seem impossible, a relic from a time when people were judged by their skin color rather than their character. I hope you'll never have to prove you belong anywhere, never have to carry the burden of other people's assumptions, never have to fight for the basic dignity that should be every person's birthright. But if that world hasn't arrived yet, if you find yourself facing your own 12 minutes, remember this. You don't have to be chairman of the board to demand respect. You don't need a title or a position or power to stand up for what's right. All you need is the courage to say no when someone tries to make you smaller than you are." He continued writing as the plane flew through the darkness, the lights of cities passing below like stars in an inverted sky. "Your great-grandmother used to tell me that dignity wasn't something anyone could give you or take away. It was something you carried inside yourself, unbreakable and unchanging. But she was only partly right. While no one can take your dignity, they can certainly try, and sometimes the trying is enough to break people." What happened on Flight 447 wasn't just about me. It was about every person who had been broken by the trying, who had been worn down by the constant need to prove they deserved basic respect. The flight attendant, Keisha, approached with his dinner, setting it down with a professional smile. "Is everything satisfactory, Mr. Thompson?" she asked, and there was something in her voice that made him look up from his laptop. "Everything is perfect," he said, and meant it. She started to move away, then turned back. "Mr. Thompson, I just wanted to say, my younger brother is starting college this fall. He's going to study aviation management because of you. Because you showed him that people like us can be in charge, can make changes, can matter." She walked away quickly before he could respond, but her words stayed with him. Another reminder that change wasn't just about policies and procedures, but about possibilities and dreams. 3 hours into the flight, turbulence hit. The plane shook and dropped, passengers gasping and reaching for armrests. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and reassuring, explaining that they were passing through a storm system, but everything was under control. Malik couldn't help but think how perfect a metaphor it was. The fight against discrimination was like flying through turbulence, uncomfortable and sometimes frightening, but necessary to reach clearer skies. And just like with airplane turbulence, the key was to keep moving forward, to trust that the structure would hold, that the destination was worth the discomfort of the journey. His phone, in airplane mode, showed dozens of downloaded messages from the day's events. There were thank you notes from students, interview requests from media outlets, and one message that stood out from the rest. It was from David Seymour, the CEO who had supported him through everything. "Malik, the board met today. Unanimous. Decision. You're being promoted to executive chairman with expanded oversight of all customer experience initiatives. Not because of Flight 447, but because of everything you've done since. You didn't just expose a problem. You fixed it, or at least you started fixing it, which is more than anyone else has managed to do." Malik stared at the message for a long time. Executive chairman meant more power, more responsibility, more ability to create change. But it also meant more scrutiny, more enemies, more people waiting for him to fail. He thought about saying no, about stepping back and letting someone else carry the torch. He had already paid his price, had already fought his fight. But then he thought about Keisha's brother starting college, about the 3 students from South Dallas becoming flight attendants, about all the people who were counting on him to keep pushing, to keep the pressure on, to not let the momentum die. He typed back a simple response: "I accept." The plane began its descent into Chicago, the city lights spreading out below like a promise. Malik could see O'Hare in the distance, the same airport where this had all started 2 years ago. But it felt different now. The terminal had been renamed the Diversity Terminal and featured an exhibit about Flight 447 and the changes it had sparked. It was a small gesture, perhaps more symbolic than substantive, but symbols mattered. They told people what was valued, what was remembered, what was considered important enough to commemorate. As the plane touched down, Malik gathered his things, thinking about the meetings that awaited him, the battles still to be fought, the changes still to be made. At baggage claim, he was approached by a middle-aged white man who looked nervous but determined. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Paul Mitchell. I was on the flight that day. Flight 447. I was the businessman in seat 1B. Malik remembered him, the man who had boarded without scrutiny while Malik was being interrogated. "I never said anything," Paul continued, his voice thick with shame. "I watched them treat you like a criminal and I said nothing. I've thought about it every day since. I've tried to do better, to speak up when I see injustice, but I wanted to apologize to you personally. My silence that day was complicity, and I'm sorry." Malik extended his hand, and Paul shook it gratefully. "Mr. Mitchell, your apology is accepted. But more importantly, your commitment to doing better is what matters. Every time you speak up now, you honor what should have happened." That day, they parted ways, Paul looking somehow lighter, as if confessing his shame had lifted a weight he'd been carrying for 2 years. Malik understood that feeling. They were all carrying weights from that day, some heavier than others, but all significant in their own way. The key was not to put the weight down, but to use it, to let it drive action rather than paralysis. The ride home was quiet, the driver recognizing him but saying nothing beyond a professional greeting. Chicago had changed in the 2 years since. Flight 447. The city had implemented its own anti-discrimination initiatives inspired by what American Airlines had done. Restaurants, hotels, retail stores, all had adopted versions of the policies Malik had championed. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was better. And better, Malik had learned, was sometimes all you could hope for. Revolution was rare, but evolution was possible. One policy at a time, one training session at a time, one changed mind at a time. At home, his wife Denise was waiting with dinner, as she had been every Tuesday for 32 years. She didn't ask about his day, knowing he would share when he was ready. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that came from decades of partnership, of knowing each other so well that words were often unnecessary. Finally, as they cleared the dishes, she spoke. "I saw the video from the school today. You look tired." He nodded. "I am tired, Dee. Sometimes I wonder if any of this makes a real difference or if we're just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic." She took his hands in hers, her touch warm and grounding. "You remember what your mother used to say? That change is like erosion. You don't see the rock changing day to day, but give it enough time and water can carve canyons." That night, unable to sleep, Malik stood at his window looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, Patricia Henderson was probably lying awake too, wrestling with her past and trying to build a future. Captain Brennan was likely preparing another presentation, another confession, another attempt at redemption. Emma Rodriguez was probably editing her latest investigation, shining light into dark corners of discrimination, and thousands of American Airlines employees were going about their work, hopefully treating every passenger with dignity, not because they feared punishment, but because they understood it was right. The 12 minutes of Flight 447 had become thousands of hours of training, millions of dollars in settlements, countless conversations about bias and privilege and justice. His phone buzzed with a notification. American Airlines stock had hit a record high, investors finally convinced that the company's commitment to equality was good for business. The cynical part of Malik wondered if that was all that mattered to them, the bottom line rather than the moral line. But the pragmatic part understood that sometimes doing the right thing for the wrong reasons was better than not doing it at all. If profit was what motivated corporations to fight discrimination, then so be it. The people who benefited from fair treatment wouldn't care why it happened, only that it did. In the morning, there would be more meetings, more policies to draft, more battles to fight. The new role as executive chairman would bring new challenges and new opportunities. There would be resistance from those who thought he had gone too far and criticism from those who thought he hadn't gone far enough. But tonight, in the quiet of his home, Malik allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Not pride exactly, but a recognition that he had used his position and privilege to create real change, that his 12 minutes of humiliation had become a catalyst for transformation that would outlive him. He thought about the letter he had been writing to his unborn grandson and added a final paragraph. "But here's the most important thing I want you to know. The fight is never really won. Each generation has to pick it up and carry it forward. What I did on Flight 447 wasn't the end of anything. It was just another chapter in a story that started long before me and will continue long after I'm gone. Your job, when your time comes, is to write your own chapter, to find your own 12 minutes and make them count. Because that's how change really happens. Not in grand gestures, but in individual moments of courage that inspire others to find their own." As dawn broke over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Malik finally felt tired enough to sleep. He thought one last time about those 12 minutes that had changed everything. Captain Morrison had been wrong to try to remove him from that first-class seat, but in a strange way, Malik was grateful it had happened. Because sometimes it takes an injustice to reveal the machinery of bias that operates just beneath the surface of polite society. Sometimes it takes 12 minutes of discrimination to spark years of progress, and sometimes it takes one person saying no to make millions realize they have the power to say it too. The story of Flight 447 would be told in business schools and civil rights seminars for years to come. It would be analyzed and debated, criticized and celebrated. But for Malik Thompson, it would always be simply the day he decided that enough was enough, that his dignity was non-negotiable, that the power he had accumulated over a lifetime of hard work meant nothing if he didn't use it to make things better for those who would come after him. The black CEO who had been denied his first-class seat had indeed grounded the plane and fired the pilot, but more importantly, he had lifted up an entire industry and fired the imagination of a generation that believed change was possible. In the end, that was the real legacy of those 12 minutes. Not the lawsuits or the policies or the corporate restructuring, but the simple, powerful idea that every person deserved to be treated with dignity and respect, and that when they weren't, there would be consequences. It was a lesson that American Airlines had learned the hard way, that Patricia Henderson and Captain Brennan had paid dearly to understand, and that the world had watched unfold in real time. And as Malik finally drifted off to sleep, he knew that somewhere someone was boarding a plane and being treated fairly because of what had happened that day. That was worth more than any title, any salary, any recognition. That was the real first-class seat, the one at the table of justice, where everyone deserved to sit. The story that had begun with Black CEO denied first-class seat, 12 minutes. Later, he grounds the plane and fires the pilot, had become so much more than a headline. It had become a movement, a reckoning, a promise that discrimination would no longer be tolerated in silence. And while the flight had ended, the journey toward true equality continued. One passenger, one policy, one moment of courage at a time.